Meet the remarkable Paper Pro, presented as a game changer for digital note-taking with its revolutionary true color ink display, a built-in frontlight for nighttime use, and an improved textured display surface, all of which mimics the look and feel of real paper better than ever? Maybe. It operates on the Linux-based Codex OS with a distraction-free user interface designed for note-taking and sketching, featuring excellent pressure and tilt sensitivity, promising a truly impressive digital note-taking experience. But beyond note-taking, now that it has colors, a faster chipset, and an even larger screen, it might also be suitable as a comic book or PDF reader. So is the remarkable Paper Pro the ultimate paper replacement, or is it just an overpriced doodle board? Well, of course it's more than that, but you get the point. Is it worth your investment? Now that the initial hype has settled, let's take an honest look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of the new remarkable e-ink tablet to check if it really has what it takes to replace your notebooks for good. The heart of the remarkable Paper Pro is its new and improved 11.8-inch color ink display with a technology called Gallery 3. Like other ink displays inside the screen, it actively aligns microcapsules filled with particles. But instead of just black and white particles, Gallery 3 uses cyan, magenta, yellow and white particles, mixing them to produce up to 20,000 colors. Similar to how it's done in print. As with all ink screens, it's reflective, meaning it reflects ambient light, almost the same as paper. But there's a key difference. Reflectance is lower. White paper reflects 80 to 90% of light. Monochrome e-ink reflects about half, while Gallery 3 reflects only a third, making it a bit darker than the two. But while the display reflects less light than monochrome ink or real paper, it still performs better than other color ink screens with Kaleido 3 technology. And because of that, colors also look more vibrant than on current books devices, for example. But you still need to manage your expectations, because this is still not the same experience as on an LCD. In comparison to an iPad, colors are still muted, though on their own it's not really an issue. Because let's be honest, how often do you compare screens like this outside of the first few hours with the device? So in everyday use, I think it's really not a huge deal, and I quickly got used to the muted look, same as with other color ink tablets. Speaking of which, let's do a quick side-by-side comparison with a couple of other ink tablets before moving on to the built-in Frontlight. When comparing the Paper Pro to these other devices, the mention points are clearly noticeable. For text, Kindle Scribe and Remarkable 2 offer the best readability, with the Paper Pro falling between them and the Color Books devices. And the slightly yellow tint of the Paper Pro's display is mostly only noticeable when comparing it side by side like this, not really an issue on its own. In terms of color rendition, the Paper Pro is clearly better than in Kaleido 3 when not using the Frontlights. Even though contrast levels seem to be a bit lower, colors are generally brighter and as a consequence more enjoyable to look at. Kaleido 3 on the other hand, even though some colors look a bit more saturated in comparison, is just too dark when not using the Frontlight, which I'll come to in a second. First, let's take a quick look under the microscope to compare some display technologies here. Aside from the more noticeable yellow tint on the Paper Pro, you'll also see that the color black has this slightly bluish tint because it's created by mixing different colored particles. There is also faint red bleed around the edges of some letters. But overall, the quality of the Paper Pro is still solid. While the black levels aren't quite as deep as those on the e-ink Kaleido 3 displays, the Paper Pro's display is quite similar to the Remarkable 2 in this aspect. For a long time, dedicated note-takers avoided Frontlights to preserve the paper-like feel as best as possible, since they usually create a gap between the ink pixels and the top of the glass. But since this is a very useful feature and Ink Gallery 3 is a bit darker, Remarkable still implemented a Frontlight on the Paper Pro and actually managed to do that without compromising the paper-like feel too much. The pen-to-ink distance is similar to the Remarkable 2, a bit better than on the Kindle Scribe, but not as good as on the Booksco 10.3, as these close-up shots show. So pen-to-ink distance is low, but the special display stack to achieve that does come with a few other compromises. For starters, the Frontlight lacks fine control with only 5 brightness levels and also has a low maximum brightness of just 4 nits. So turning up the Frontlight in brighter environments is pretty much pointless and definitely a missed opportunity. Some might argue that that's not the purpose of the Frontlight, but I disagree. As long as ink reflects less light than real paper, a frontlight can be beneficial even in brighter environments. And especially with a generally darker screen like this one, it would have been nice if it were brighter. With that in mind, let's compare the Paper Pro's display with the frontlight at full brightness with other devices at various levels to see how it affects screen perception. Unsurprisingly, we are seeing the biggest improvements in the much darker color ink devices from books. With the frontlight enabled, they look much better than before. The smaller Bookstep Mini C even looks better sometimes and showing more detail than the Paper Pro. And when taking them outside, the gap closes even further. In dim environments, the 4 nits maximum brightness of the Paper Pro is generally enough for comfortable reading, once your eyes adjust. But even then, the first 2 levels are so dim that they can be challenging to use in my opinion. This essentially leaves us with only 3 useful brightness levels. But despite it being generally dim, the frontlight still isn't very uniform. There are slight halos at the bottom of the screen, and the center and top of the display have slightly different color and brightness levels noticeable to the naked eye. There's also light bleed at the edges of the screen and bezel. And while I actually like the soft glow at the screen's edges, the light bleed at the outer edges doesn't look great. The color temperature is not adjustable, which is definitely unusual in this price segment. It seems like Remarkable aimed for a color temperature of roughly 4500 Kelvin, which is considered to be relatively neutral, with a hint of warmth. And despite rumors to the contrary, the frontlight's temperature doesn't adjust automatically, which I checked with the light spectrometer. So all in all, the frontlight enhances the user experience because when lighting conditions are not ideal, the soft glow is still better than not having it at all, but there is definitely room for improvement here. Ghosting on the other hand generally was a welcome surprise. In case you don't know the term, ghosting happens when some ink pixels get stuck in their positions, creating an afterimage of the screen's previous contents. That's usually fixed with a full page refresh that results in the typical ink flickering. When talking about ghosting on the Remarkable Paper Pro, we need to differentiate between documents or ebooks and other operations on the device. Remarkable has implemented an impressive ink mode for viewing PDF files that results in almost no ghosting. Sometimes still visible, but generally much less noticeable than with many other devices, black and white ink included. When it comes to other parts of the system, ghosting can be a bit more noticeable though. Switching from the home screen into a notebook, I can often see outlines of the thumbnails. They are not especially obvious and might not be visible now because of YouTube's compression, but seem to be a bit more pronounced than what you'd find in PDF files. What's unusual about ghosting on the Paper Pro is its slightly yellow tint, which is especially noticeable when scrolling through pages. Here you can clearly see it, but interestingly, that disappears by itself for the most part even without a full page refresh. But the Paper Pro still has more flashing than most monochrome ink displays, not just because of the ghosting, but also because how colors are rendered. Because the colored ink particles are moved into position one after another essentially, which results in this flickering effect. Personally, I don't find it annoying. And my very first e-reader, the Sony PRS 505, also had a lot more flashing than today's models, so I have a tolerance for that. But it still might be an issue for some. Comparing it to the Big Migueli, which was the first Gallery 3 tablet, it's essentially a night and day difference in favor of the Paper Pro, which has a much quicker refresh and also less ghosting. When drawing colored lines inside of notebooks, it's not immediately rendered in the chosen color. Instead, it's traced either in black or another particle mix and then fades in. And after that, there's another refresh to finalize the stroke's color. Same as before, I think it's a good solution to overcome the limitations this technology has right now. And it's totally fine to use it this way, but it can be off-putting if we're sensitive to it. This is not an issue with black lines though. So taking notes like this is generally a pretty calming experience, except for the loud scratching sound the pen nib generates when moving it over the textured display surface. Writing on the Paper Pro does have noticeable friction, but compared to other ink tablets, the hard pen tip still makes it feel harsher and a bit slippery at the same time. The pen doesn't use Wacom technology, but is active now. And even though there is USI compatibility, you can't really use other styluses reliably. Some have a problem with the tilt, others create extremely wobbly lines. Speaking about wobbly lines, that's something that's also noticeable with the original Remarkable marker. To a lesser extent, but I was honestly still quite surprised by it. When drawing long lines, especially diagonally, there's often an obvious wobble that's honestly hard to ignore. Even after cleaning the screen and changing the pen tip, the issue persists. I can even feel a slight unevenness when running the pen over the screen. That's not especially great for sketching, but at least it's not really noticeable when writing. Speaking of it, let's talk about the writing experience more broadly. One thing that bothers me when writing on the Remarkable Paper Pro is the tapping sound that's very similar to an iPad and Apple Pencil when the pen tip and display make contact. That initial contact is a bit too hard in my opinion, especially because you're lifting a pen and putting it down on the screen all of the time, which results in this constant tapping sound. But the good news is, writing with the pen feels almost instant. Remarkable claims 12 milliseconds latency, though my test showed about 20 milliseconds, similar to other ink devices. However, before you get your pitchforks out, that's only half of the story here, because I suspect Remarkable is actually talking about the ink response time and not pen latency, because that's noticeably quicker than with other ink displays. Instead of this prominent fade-in effect that we see with other tablets, black lines on the Paper Pro are much quicker to reach their final black levels. And that effect is indeed just 12 milliseconds short, creating this incredibly responsive feel when writing with the pen. So, does the Remarkable Paper Pro provide a better writing experience than other ink tablets? To be honest, I'd say mostly no when it comes to the physical writing feel. Personally, I think the scratchy sound is a bit too pronounced, but I especially dislike the harsh touchdown of the pen, and the wobbly lines are certainly less than ideal. However, when it comes to how responsive the screen feels, the Paper Pro is definitely in a class of its own. It simply feels much quicker and more natural to write on. Before coming to the software, let's quickly talk about the build quality, because Remarkable nailed it with the Paper Pro. With its aluminum body, it feels incredibly high-end and reminds me a lot of an iPad Pro. And the stylized notebook pages on the frame are also a nice touch. But the sharp edges, which makes it feel boxier compared to the Remarkable 2, are a bit of a drawback, because together with the weight of 525 grams and the narrow side bezels, it's generally less comfortable to hold and sits on the desk most of the time as a consequence. For optimal stability, the Paper Pro has these 4 rubber feet on the back side, which are massive compared to the Remarkable 2. These reliably keep the tablet from sliding on the desk while writing. Very nice touch. Personally, I also like the larger form factor of the 11.8-inch display a lot, as it gives more space for notes. But keep in mind that the tablet is noticeably larger as a result, which can hurt portability. Speaking about it, typically you'll use one of the folios to transport a tablet. And I'm especially happy that those now finally have sleep mode support. Opening and closing the front cover automatically manages the standby mode of the device. Another nice touch is how removing the pen also wakes up the device. The pen magnetically attaches to the side of the device, which feels very sturdy, so I actually never had issues with dropping the pen, unlike with some competitors. The active pen charges automatically when attached, with a small icon indicating its battery status. Though no official numbers are available, similar pens last around 100 hours on a single charge, making battery life of the pen a non-issue in my opinion. I have the Marker Plus here, which is a bit heavier than the regular marker and very well balanced. It really lies incredibly well in the hand. There's also an eraser on top, which I always find very handy. The Remarkable Paper Pro runs Codex OS, which is the same Linux-based system we already know from the Remarkable 2. It focuses on the essentials for note-taking and sketching. The company actually takes a bit of an Apple approach with its user interface, because they have reduced everything to the core essentials without providing an overwhelming number of options, while still maintaining the most important functions. So the UI is clean and easy to use. You can organize your files in folders and subfolders, and you can also use tags and favorites to organize everything. Notes that have been opened and synced within the last 50 days are kept in the cloud for that period. without additional cost. If you want unlimited storage for your notes, you need the Connect subscription, which is €3 or US dollars per month, which is a fair price. One standard feature is the full disk encryption to prevent unauthorized access to the contents of the device even if you lose it. I only wish they added a fingerprint sensor for better convenience. Inside the notebook you can use the following pen types: ballpoint pen, fine liner, highlighter, pencil, magnetical pencil, calligraphy pen, marker, shader, and paintbrush. All of them are incredibly well implemented, and you can tell that the company put in a lot of time and effort into optimizing them. With some you can utilize 4096 pressure levels and tilt sensitivity, which are very intuitive to use and well calibrated. The pencil pen type is the best I've seen so far, even surpassing the excellent Kindle Scribe now. And of course, the option to use colors is incredibly helpful. Research has shown that using colors for annotations improves memory, comprehension, and cognitive engagement. So this is an advantage compared to black and white ink that's awesome to have. Besides the handwriting features, you can also place typed text on a page, but honestly, that implementation is still lacking, because you can't just move the text to a position you like. And believe it or not, the typed text is still not aligned with the templates, which is just messy. Speaking about the templates, there are a lot of high quality, useful ones to choose from. You can also organize a page with layers. So for example, you could put comments into a separate layer and hide that layer when they are not needed. Another well implemented feature is the scrollable notebook page. Instead of having a fixed canvas, you can scroll vertically and horizontally. And you can also zoom in and out to get a better overview and also add small annotations. You can also convert handwriting to typed text, which works well in general, but needs to be triggered manually and isn't especially quick. One thing that's painfully missing here is the option to search your handwritten notes without doing this manual conversion, which is something already possible with books and Supernote tablets. When taking notes for a while, I noticed the Remarkable Paper Pro gets a bit warm on the bottom half of the screen. Not so much that it creates discomfort, but it can be noticeable. And also worth mentioning, the tablet showed me a sunlight and heat notification when using it outside. I noticed that ghosting seemed a bit more pronounced after that notification popped up, which fits the message that says that the display needs to refresh more often. Because the Remarkable Paper Pro is faster, has colors, got a larger screen, the tablet is now an attractive option for PDFs and comics. Colors are pleasant to look at, with the color yellow to be a bit too pronounced relative to the others. But on the other hand, the color green, which was one of the weak spots of the previous Gallery 3 generation, looks better now. The somewhat grainy render quality when viewing PDFs can be an issue though. When looking a bit closer, you can see the ink dots on the screen, which takes a bit of time getting used to in my opinion. One other thing you might notice is the almost inaudible Coil-Whine coming from the Paper Pro when it refreshes the screen. It's barely noticeable, but if you're sensitive to such things, it might be a bit annoying. Personally, I don't mind it. So as a comic book reader, I would say the Remarkable Paper Pro is certainly intriguing, with the colors and the larger 11.8-inch screen, but still is a compromise in a few aspects. For more text-heavy PDFs, there's a contrast mode available to improve contrast levels and embolden text, which is definitely needed for small text that would otherwise look washed out. However, this high contrast mode can reduce clarity on some shades of gray and other lighter colors. Zooming in and panning on a PDF page works well. Responsiveness to touch input could be a bit better at times, though. But same as in notebooks, ghosting is very obvious at first and then slowly fades away. You can annotate directly on PDF pages, so using the Paper Pro for that is definitely great. Especially because the larger screen size lets you view thin A4 contents almost in the original size. You can also read EPUB ebooks, but that's the same rudimentary experience as with the predecessor. There's also no built-in ebook store on here, and you can't install the Kindle app. So in short, you can read EPUB ebooks on here, but the Paper Pro is just not meant to be an e-reader. And that finally brings us to battery life. The Remarkable Paper Pro has a massive 5030 mAh battery, for which the company promises up to 2 weeks on a single charge. But of course that depends on what you're doing. In my experience, when taking notes, you can expect a runtime of roughly 6 to 7 hours of continuous note-taking, which should bring you through a day at work or school. Just reading an alt-text PDF with the front lights turned off and the page turn interval of 15 seconds, the battery drain is roughly 7% per hour, which results in 14 hours on one charge. With the front lights on full brightness, the runtime decreases to around 12 hours. And with heavy color usage, like in comics, the Paper Pro also manages around 12 hours without the front light and 11 hours with the front light on full brightness. So not a huge difference between using the front light or not, which isn't that surprising because, as I mentioned, it's rather dim and doesn't draw too much energy as a result. Okay, so that's it. And the initial question remains: is the Remarkable Paper Pro worth your money? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're already interested in a device like this, the larger screen, color capabilities, and improved responsiveness definitely add a lot of value. The Paper Pro offers features that black and white ink devices simply can't, especially if you're someone who relies on color for organization, creativity, or reading more visually complex content like comics and PDFs. But it's not without its flaws. The writing feel, for one, isn't as satisfying as it was on the Remarkable 2. The screen flickering for color rendering might also be a deal breaker if you're sensitive to that. And if you're perfectly happy with a monochrome ink tablet, you might find these trade-offs hard to justify. And we haven't even started talking about the price, which is at least $580 or 650 euros. At the end of the day, the Remarkable Paper Pro pushes the boundaries of what ink can do, but it's not perfect. It's a leap forward in some ways and a compromise in others. Personally, I like the color edition a lot, and I think it adds a lot of value both for note-taking and for PDF files. With its faster chipset and larger screen, the Paper Pro is actually a solid comic book reader with decent battery life. My main complaints are actually things that I feel Remarkable tried to reinvent without the need to. The frontlight takes a completely different approach than any other device on the market, making it too dim and not giving me the option to actually choose brighter levels if I wanted to. And the active pen support with the harsher writing feel and wobbly performance was a completely unnecessary change from the excellent Remarkable 2's writing feel, in my opinion. But having said that, I still like the Paper Pro a lot because the overall package is just unlike anything we've seen in the ink space so far. And at the end of the day, using the tablet is still a very satisfying analog-like experience. I'm sure we will see more devices like this in the future, but whether this one is the right one for you depends on how much those extra features matter to you right now. I have a couple of side-by-side in-depth comparisons to other ink tablets like the Remarkable 2, Kindle Scribe, and Booksnote Air 3C lined up, so make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss those, and also if you found this review helpful. Also let me know in the comments below which other comparisons you'd like to see. Thanks for your time watching, and I'll see you in the next one.